The billionaire saw the maid searching trash for her baby. And what he did next shocked everyone. He had never stopped the car for anyone. Not once in 11 years of driving that same route down Hargrove Avenue. Not for the man who collapsed outside the pharmacy 2 winters ago. Not for the teenager who dropped her groceries on the curb in the rain. Not for anyone. He had a schedule. He had a driver. He had places to be and people waiting on his word and billions of dollars depending on his focus. And yet, on a cold Tuesday morning in October, with a breakfast meeting at 8 and a contract worth $340 million sitting unsigned on his desk, Elliot Vance told his driver to stop the car. Because through the tinted glass of a blacked-out SUV, in the gray light before the city had fully woken up, he saw a woman. She was crouched beside a large industrial trash bin outside a convenience store on the corner of Hargrove and Fifth. She was young. She was wearing the pale blue uniform of the cleaning staff at the Vance Grand Hotel. His hotel, and she was searching through garbage with both hands. Not frantically, not carelessly, carefully, quietly, like someone who had learned that desperation had to be hidden in public. In her other arm, pressed against her chest like something precious, was a child. A tiny girl, barely 2 years old, wrapped in a coat that was too thin for the morning air. Her small head resting on her mother's shoulder. Elliot watched from the car. He watched the woman pull something out of the bin and examine it. A sealed bottle of juice. She checked it, once, twice, and then tucked it under her arm beside the child. She didn't look around to see who was watching. She already knew no one was. That was the moment something shifted inside Elliot Vance. Something he couldn't name yet. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. He didn't know, sitting in that car with his coffee going cold in the cup holder and his phone buzzing with messages from people who needed him to be somewhere else, that this Tuesday morning was the last morning of the life he had always chosen. He just said, "Pull over." Elliot Vance's penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Vance Tower on the east side of the city. It was the kind of home that appeared in architecture magazines under words like visionary and curated, and a monument to refined living. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. A kitchen with appliances that had never been used beyond heating water. A dining table that seated 12, where only 1 chair ever moved. Every morning at 5:45, an alarm went off. Not a phone alarm. An actual clock, analog, brass, sitting on the bedside table. Because Elliot had read once that starting the day with a screen damaged your decision-making, and everything in his life was organized around optimal decision-making. He was out of bed by 5:46. By 6:15 he had completed 40 minutes on the rowing machine in the room he called the fitness space but never called a gym, because the word gym implied something casual and Elliot did not do casual. He showered in water that was precisely 38 degrees, cold enough to shock the nervous system, warm enough not to waste time recovering. He dressed in one of the 14 identical dark charcoal suits hanging in his wardrobe, each one measured and pressed to the same standard. By 6:50 he was at his desk reading market reports. The housekeeper came at 7:30. She was a different person every few months because the agency rotated staff. And Elliot preferred it that way. Familiarity was a variable he didn't need. They let themselves in with a key card, cleaned the apartment in under an hour without speaking to him, left without saying goodbye. He respected that. He expected that. He ate breakfast alone. Lunch, if he ate it, was alone at his desk. Dinner was often at industry events or restaurants, surrounded by people whose company he could categorize as professional, useful, transactional. He had a brother in Portland he called twice a year on birthdays. He had a personal assistant named Owen who communicated almost exclusively through calendar invites. He had colleagues who respected him, competitors who feared him, and no one, not one person in his life, who knew what he looked like when he was uncertain. He was worth $4.2 billion. He had not laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that catches you off guard, in longer than he could remember. His friends, if you asked them, would have described Elliot as someone who had everything. His former fiancée, if you asked her, and reporters had twice, would have said, Elliot was the loneliest person I ever met. He just didn't know it. She had left 5 years ago. He had restructured 2 companies in the month that followed, as if grief were something you could outwork. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he had believed it long enough that it had simply become true. The penthouse was immaculate. It was silent. It was full of light and empty of warmth. And Elliot Vance moved through it every day like a man who had built a life so perfect it had no room left in it for anything alive. Sarah Navarro had been awake since 4. Not because she was disciplined. Not because she had a rowing machine or a brass alarm clock or a morning routine from a self-improvement article. Because Lily had a cough that came and went, and every time it came back, Sarah sat up in the dark and listened until it passed. Counted the seconds between each ragged little breath. Decided, for the 11th time that week, whether this was the night she needed to take her daughter to the emergency room, and what that would cost, and whether she could cover it, and what she'd have to not pay for the rest of the month if she did. This night the cough passed. Sarah lay back down in the narrow bed of the room she rented. A single room in a shared apartment, 12-minute bus ride from the hotel, $470 a month, not including utilities, and stared at the ceiling until her phone alarm went off at 5:15. She dressed quietly so as not to wake Lily. She checked on her daughter 3 times before she left. She left a cup of water on the nightstand and a folded note, even though Lily couldn't read yet. Just said, "Mama will be back. I love you most." The hotel shuttle picked up staff at 5:58 from the corner of Delaney and Main. Sarah was always there by 5:50 because being late meant being replaced. She had been at the Vance Grand for 8 months. She was good at her job in the way that people who cannot afford to be anything less are good at their jobs. She was thorough. She was quiet. She was invisible in the way the best housekeeping staff always are. Present enough to maintain a standard, absent enough that the guests never had to think about them. Her supervisor, a woman named Darlene who had a kind face and a complicated system for shift allocations, had twice told Sarah she was one of the best workers on the floor. She had not offered her more hours or a pay increase, but the compliment was given sincerely, and Sarah had held on to it. On the morning Elliot's driver stopped the car, Sarah had not eaten breakfast. She had found the juice, a small bottle of apple juice, sealed, dropped beside the bin and not inside it, and she had put it in her bag for Lily. She had done this calmly without shame, because she had crossed the border between pride and survival a long time ago, and she knew which side kept her daughter alive. Lily was extraordinary. Not because Sarah thought all mothers thought their children were extraordinary, though she knew they did, but because Lily, even at 2 years old, seemed to understand things that could not be explained. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She pressed her small palm against Sarah's cheek when Sarah was tired, as if she could feel the weight her mother was carrying and wanted to hold some of it. She said words she shouldn't have known yet. She watched the world with enormous dark eyes that missed nothing. She was the most expensive and most valuable thing in Sarah's life, in the same breath. She was the reason Sarah got up at 5:15 every morning and the reason she didn't break. It started without intention. On the day Elliot saw Sarah at the bin, he had his driver pull over. He had stepped out of the car, something that confused Owen so deeply that he sent 3 messages in rapid succession asking if everything was all right. He walked to the corner of Hargrove and Fifth. By the time he got there, Sarah was already moving away. He didn't call out. He didn't know what he would have said. He went to his breakfast meeting. He signed nothing. But that afternoon he called the hotel manager and asked, with deliberate casualness, about the staffing protocols for housekeeping. Whether staff had access to the staff meal program. Whether the rates were competitive. He phrased it as a routine operational review. The manager told him what he already suspected. The hourly rate was technically compliant. The staff meal program existed but was underused, And no, nobody had raised concerns. The next morning, Elliot made a change to his standing instruction with the agency. He requested the same cleaning staff be assigned to the penthouse, consistently. Sarah arrived on a Thursday. She let herself in at 7:30, as protocol required. She moved through the apartment quietly, efficiently. She didn't look at things that weren't her business. She did her job. Elliot was at his desk. He said nothing. She said nothing. But on her second visit, she arrived with Lily. She stood in the doorway for a moment after she swiped her keycard, unsure whether this would be the thing that got her fired. Darlene had told her, once, just once, that children were never supposed to be in guest spaces. But the neighbor who watched Lily had a family emergency, and the backup sitter was unavailable, and Sarah had no other option except not come in at all, and not coming in was not an option. She stepped inside. She put Lily down in the entryway with a soft toy rabbit and a small bag of dry cereal and said quietly, "Stay here, baby. Don't touch anything." Lily looked at the apartment. The apartment was the biggest thing she had ever seen in her 2 years of life. She looked at Elliot. Elliot looked at her. Lily held up the rabbit. "Bunny," she said seriously, as if this were important information he needed. Something moved across Elliot's face. He didn't smile, not fully. But something moved. "I see," he said. After that, Sarah brought Lily twice a week because the schedule aligned and the options hadn't improved. She always apologized when she arrived. Elliot always said, "It's fine," and then returned to his desk, and Lily always found him within 7 minutes because she had the attention span of someone who had not yet learned that adults who sit at desks do not want to be disturbed. She would stand beside his chair and look up at him. Just look. Until he looked back. "Bunny tired," she announced one morning. "Bunny should rest then," he said. She considered this. Then she put the rabbit on the edge of his desk, very carefully, as if she were placing it in a bed. "You watch him," she said. She walked away. She did not look back. She trusted completely. Elliot sat there for a full minute staring at a stuffed rabbit on his desk. And then, very quietly, he moved it 3 inches to the left so it wouldn't fall. It happened slowly, the way all real things happen. Not in a single moment but in an accumulation of small ones. Lily drawing on the back of printer paper he gave her. She drew circles and called them dogs. Lily falling asleep on the couch in the corner and Elliot asking Sarah, in a low voice, whether he should cover her with something. Sarah staring at him for a moment before saying yes, there's a throw on the chair, and watching him walk across the room and lay it over her daughter like someone handling something breakable and irreplaceable. One morning, Lily woke up from her nap, looked around the unfamiliar apartment and said, "Daddy." She wasn't looking at Elliot. She was half asleep, still caught in a dream. But he heard it. He didn't correct it. He sat very still and let it pass, and then he went to the kitchen and stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the city. There are moments in a life that look ordinary from the outside. A man standing at a window. A child asleep on a couch. A woman folding towels in a hallway, humming something low and half-remembered. From the outside it looked like nothing. But something was changing. Elliot Vance, who had not rearranged his schedule for a personal reason in over 4 years, began finishing his morning calls by 7:25 instead of 7:40. He told Owen it was efficiency. Owen updated the calendar and said nothing, because Owen was paid to say nothing, but he noticed. He noticed other things too. The brass alarm clock moved from 5:45 to 5:40. The 12-seat dining table had, for the first time in Elliot's memory, 2 cups on it. 1 black coffee. 1 orange juice with a straw. Small concessions. Tiny shift. He told himself it was nothing. What Elliot didn't know was that 3 people, far from his apartment, had already begun making decisions that would reach him. And he didn't know that in 6 days, everything in his life that had started to feel warm would be put in the path of something very cold. If Sarah had switched to the morning shift that week, like she'd been considering, she would never have been assigned to the penthouse again. If she had left on time that Thursday, none of what came next would have happened. But she didn't leave on time. And the man who saw everything didn't see what was coming. The call came on a Monday. Elliot took it in the kitchen, which he never did. He took calls at his desk. But he was making tea, a habit he hadn't had before, acquired somewhere in the last few weeks. At around the same time, Lily had decided that the kitchen was her favorite room because it had the most interesting smells. The voice on the other end of the call was Douglas Rain. The name meant a great deal in the city's business circles. It meant development contracts, infrastructure deals, the kind of money that reshaped neighborhoods. Rain's firm wanted a partnership with Vance Properties on the largest urban redevelopment project the East Side had seen in 30 years. The deal was worth close to $500 million. It would take a flagship building Elliot owned on the East Corridor, a functional, older property, and gut it entirely. New luxury tower, high-end residences, retail on the ground floor. You'd be looking at a groundbreaking before the end of the financial year, Rain said. We need commitment by Friday. Elliot said he would review the documents. What he already knew because he was meticulous and had read every property record the building held. The building on the East Corridor housed 12 commercial tenants, including a staffing agency. The agency that housed the dormitory program, a temporary, subsidized housing arrangement for workers who couldn't afford local rent while transitioning to stable accommodation. 41 people lived there under that program. Sarah Navarro and Lily were two of them. He had not known this before the call. He looked it up after. He sat with the documents open on his second screen and Lily's crayon drawings, circles that were dogs, a scribble she told him was Elliot's building but prettier, stacked in a small pile beside his keyboard, and he read the relocation clause. Standard, clean, legal, 60 days notice, a one-time payment to the agency, all tenants to vacate. He had signed documents like this before, many times without sitting with them. This time he sat with it for a very long time. Friday was 4 days away. Rain's office would want an answer. The building was worth more to him demolished than standing. That was simply arithmetic. Had always been arithmetic. He closed the file. He opened it again. He thought about a woman crouching beside a trash bin in the gray morning, pressing a 2-year-old child against her chest with one arm. He thought about 60 days. Where they would go. What 60 days looked like when you were earning what Sarah earned and supporting what she was supporting. He thought about a rabbit left on the edge of his desk. He closed the file again. He didn't sleep that night. Owen sent the countersigned framework to Rain's office on Wednesday. Elliot authorized it at 2:17 in the afternoon, while Sarah was in the other room changing the bedding, and Lily was asleep on the couch under the same gray throw. He sat at his desk and he looked at his own signature on the digital document and he felt nothing. He was good at feeling nothing. He had been doing it for a long time. By Thursday morning, the deal was in motion. Rain's legal team sent a celebratory message. Owen flagged it in green. The financial projections were extraordinary, above even the conservative estimates. This was the deal that would define the next decade of Vance Properties. Everyone who knew anything in the industry would recognize what this meant. Elliot arrived at the penthouse at 6:15. He sat at his desk. He looked out at the city. Sarah arrived at 7:30. Lily was with her. She had her rabbit. She had a new drawing she had made the night before, on a piece of cardstock from somewhere, in purple crayon. A large shape and a small shape standing side by side. She walked up to his desk and put it on the keyboard. "That's you," she said, pointing to the big shape. She pointed to the small shape. "That's me." He looked at the drawing. He looked at her. "We're the same color," he said, because they were. She had used purple for both. He shrugged. "Because you're my family," she said simply. And then she walked away to investigate the kitchen. He didn't move for a long time. In the other room, Sarah was making the beds. She didn't know yet. He hadn't told her. He was not required to tell her. The relocation notice would come through official channels, from the agency, in the appropriate time frame, in compliance with the law. He had done nothing wrong. He looked at the drawing. He looked at his signature on the document open in the other tab. He looked at the drawing again. He pressed send. Sarah found out on Thursday afternoon. Not from Elliot. From Darlene, who had heard from the agency director, who had received preliminary notice from a property management firm acting on behalf of Vance Properties. She didn't say anything when she came back into the apartment to collect her supplies. Elliot was on a call. He didn't see her face. But Lily did. Lily climbed down from the couch and walked to her mother and pressed both small hands against Sarah's knees and looked up at her. Sarah knelt down. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and stroked Lily's hair and said, "It's okay, baby. We're going to be okay." She didn't know he had heard that. His call ended. The apartment was very quiet. Lily walked to the center of the room, looked at Elliot and said, "Why is Mama sad?" That was all. 4 words. He opened his mouth. He had an answer. He had several answers, practical, logical, well-constructed answers about market forces and legal processes and the reality that large decisions affected people, and that was simply the nature of things. He said none of them. Because in that moment, looking at this child, this small, entirely trusting 2-year-old child who had put a rabbit on his desk and drawn him in purple crayon and called him family without knowing what any of it cost, he felt something come apart inside him. Not grief. Not guilt. Something older than both. Something that had been building since he was not 2 years old but 8 years old and sitting in a hospital waiting room and being told, in careful words by a careful adult, that his mother would not be coming home. Something that had been frozen by years of early alarms and controlled showers and signed documents and 1 chair at a 12-seat table. Lily was still looking at him. She was waiting for an answer the way only children wait. Completely without agenda, without suspicion. She just wanted to know. "Because I made a mistake," he said. His voice was quiet. He had not said those words, those 3 words in that order, in longer than he could remember. He couldn't remember the last time he had let himself. Lily nodded very seriously. "It's okay," she said. "You can fix it." She picked up her rabbit and walked back to the couch and sat down. Just like that. He stood in the center of his penthouse with $4.2 billion of nothing around him, and a child's drawing on his desk, and shook, very slightly, like something enormous and long still beginning to move. He was 8 years old when his mother died. Cardiac arrest, sudden, no warning. She was 34. She had been a hotel cleaner. Not by choice, by circumstance, by the architecture of a life that had given her limited doors. She cleaned rooms in a building on the east side of the city. She worked the early shift. She left before he woke up. He used to find her notes on the kitchen table. They said things like, "Cereal is in the cupboard. I love you most." He didn't remember learning that phrase. He had never consciously connected it to anything. He did not know, had never known, that the words his brain had buried from age 8 had been written 2 decades later, in a small room 12 minutes from this building, by a woman leaving for a 5:15 shift, pressed on a notepad beside a cup of water for a child who couldn't read yet. He did not know that either. He knew other things. He knew that after his mother died, he had been raised by his father, a man of few words and considerable discipline who had looked at grief and decided the correct response was forward motion. His father meant well. His father loved him in the way that men who don't know how to show love, by providing, by pushing, by filling space with structure, because structure was the only language available. Elliot had learned that language fluently. He had never learned the other one. He had spent 30 years building a life that looked like success from every angle. Controlled. Organized against loss. Designed so that nothing could be taken from him. because he had made sure he needed nothing that could be taken. But a child had put a rabbit on his desk and called him family. And now he was standing in the ruin of that design, and it felt, and this was the terrifying part, it felt like relief. He called Rain at 8:17 that evening. Douglas Rain answered on the second ring. He was not a man who missed calls from Elliot Vance. Elliot spoke for approximately 4 minutes. He withdrew from the partnership. He was calm. He was clear. He said it was a personal decision related to a change in strategic priorities. He said he was happy to provide a formal letter. He said he understood this created complications for Rain's timeline, and he apologized for the disruption. Rain was not calm. Rain used several words that Elliot absorbed without reaction. Rain mentioned the legal implications of backing out at this stage. Rain mentioned what this would signal to the market. Rain said Elliot was making an irrational decision based on, and he actually said this, sentiment. Elliot said, "I know." He ended the call. He sat in the quiet of the apartment. He called his legal team next. He asked them to review the East Corridor building's existing housing agreements and explore every mechanism available to protect the current tenants. He asked them what it would cost to retrofit, not demolish. He asked them what renovation rather than redevelopment would look like. Owen received 17 calendar notifications in the following hour and, for the first time in his professional life, sent back a question mark. Elliot did not explain. He pulled up the financial projections. He rewrote them. The numbers were worse. They were manageable. They were honest. He then did something he had not done in a professional context in years. He wrote a letter, by hand because typing it felt insufficient, to the staffing agency, explaining that the building would not be sold, that the housing program would not be disrupted, that he was initiating a formal review of the program structure and funding with the aim of improving it. He did not sign it from his company. He signed it from himself. Elliot Vance. Not Vance Properties. Not CEO, not chairman. Just his name. He told Sarah on a Friday. Not in a dramatic way. Not with an announcement or a speech. He waited until Lily was occupied with her drawing. More dogs, more circles, a son that was also possibly a face. And he said quietly that the building wasn't being sold. That the housing arrangement would continue. That he wanted her to know. Sarah looked at him. She had a gift. Or perhaps it was just something years of surviving taught you, for reading what wasn't said. She looked at him for a long moment, and she understood something in the space between what he'd said and what he hadn't. She said, "Thank you." Nothing else. She didn't ask why or how or what it cost him. She just said thank you, and she meant it in a way that had weight, and then she went back to work. Things changed slowly after that. Not romantically. Nothing in life that is real moves that quickly, and neither of them were people who moved quickly toward anything that mattered. But there were small things. The dining table was used differently. Not just for paperwork. On a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were when Sarah worked the latest, Elliot made dinner. Something simple. He had watched a video for 38 minutes to confirm he was doing it correctly. He set the table before they arrived. Lily sat in the chair at the corner. She had always, quietly, chosen the same one. Lily talked about the circles that were dogs. She explained at length that the sun face was actually a portrait of Bunny's cousin, who lived far away and was named Gerald. Elliot asked several follow-up questions about Gerald with complete seriousness. Sarah watched them and felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Not since before Lily's father had disappeared. Not since before survival had taken up the whole room. She felt that the future might be something other than a problem to be managed. She felt safe. Not because someone had rescued her. She would never accept that framing of her own life. But because someone had made space. Had moved over. Had looked at her and her daughter and chosen, at real cost, to make room. And that was different. That was something she hadn't been given in a very long time. Lily fell asleep at the table that night, face resting on her folded arms, Bunny tucked under one elbow. Neither of the adults moved to wake her. They sat in the quiet of the apartment that had, without anyone announcing it, stopped being empty. There's a version of this story where Elliot Vance signs the document, and the building comes down and the deal closes and the numbers are exceptional and Sarah Navarro finds somewhere else to go. And maybe she does. Maybe she's resilient enough, she's proven that, to survive one more closed door. But doors matter. They matter in ways the people who don't need them never fully understand. There's something that happens when a person who has everything looks at a person who has almost nothing, and chooses. Not from obligation, not from guilt, but from something that woke up in them when they weren't expecting it, to share the room. Doesn't fix everything. Doesn't fix the system. It doesn't solve the arithmetic of a world where some people spend entire lives working and still can't get ahead. But it changes what's possible. For a woman who had been invisible. For a child who called strangers family with complete confidence. For a man who had built a fortress so perfectly that nothing could reach him, until a 2-year-old walked across a room and put a stuffed rabbit on his desk and looked up at him like he was already the person she believed him to be. Lily was right. He could fix it. And somewhere inside him, something 8 years old and still waiting had known that, if he was ever brave enough, he would. Not every story like this one ends this way. But some do. And the ones that do, they tend to start with something small. Choice to stop the car. A decision to stay one more minute. Someone choosing to see, really see, the person right in front of them. If that kind of story reaches something in you, the kind that reminds you what people are capable of when they stop moving long enough to actually look, then you're in the right place. This channel exists for exactly that. Hit subscribe if you want more. Not because we're asking for a number. Because you deserve more stories that remind you why people are worth believing in.